We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Welcome to another Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. I'm joined this week by Hannah Rodger, who's the political editor of the Sunday Mail, and of course Douglas Dickie of the Scottish Daily Express, who I think is probably to the left of Ben just a little bit. What do you think?
I think so. I think I'm more kind of centrist dad. You are compared to Ben. So
so I think that's a fair assessment.
Ben is just like right-wing lunatic.
I just don't trust these right-wing Lib Dems. I mean, he's the most right-wing Lib Dem since Nick Clegg.
I think John Swinney's going to have a summit about him, actually. So.
The Borland talks.
I'll go to that, definitely.
Yeah.
So, Hannah, you and I were at the STUC Congress in Dundee this week. Always a pleasure, always a joy. I think that it'd be fair to say that the issues that dominated were workers' rights, public services, the rise of the far right, the cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
First Minister John Swinney was also there, as was the Scottish Labour leader Anas Sarwar. My impressions were that both leaders gave pretty flat speeches. Delegates politely applauded at the end of the speeches. There was no standing ovation, there was no real enthusiasm. What you had was essentially First Minister John Swinney calling for the UK government to do things like ditch their fiscal rules, go closer to the EU, and then of course Anas Sarwar blamed the Scottish government for so much. There was not much of a positive agenda there, and it felt like this is going to be how it's going to be until the next Holyrood election. Just this sort of constant mutual blame game.
Yeah, I think so. But also, it wasn't a political rally. I feel it wasn't really the correct platform to be kind of taking jabs at the other side. Workers who are seeing their wages go down, their kind of like rights removed in some cases, struggling to feed their children, etc. They don't really care whose fault it is, and I don't think either of the speeches actually would have done much to please workers or the delegates who were there. I mean, I did feel as if there was quite a sort of muted response to both of them. And, while there was a lot of good work going on among delegates and among different representatives from, unions outside of the conference centre itself or outside the hall, I think the actual political element of it was quite lacking in any sort of tangible, announcements or much enthusiasm. I thought Anas Sarwar's speech was particularly weird, to be honest.
Weird how? Well,
there was some mention afterwards of, he avoided mentioning Keir Starmer. I don't know if that was a deliberate thing or not, but I think for the Labour Party, the clue is in the name. That should be your sort of, bread and butter event. You should be getting a standing ovation. You should be getting a lot of interest, and there just wasn't. I think that kind of signifies the place that Scottish Labour's in at the moment.
I felt like delegates wanted to hear from Anas Sarwar his positive vision of change, what he's going to do on workers' rights, what he's going to do in public services, rather than just hear him moan about the Scottish government. I mean, we've heard that tune before. They're playing it during the Holyrood by-election. I'm not blaming them for it, but I did speak to one delegate after Anas Sarwar's speech, and the phrase used was, "Is that it?" People just felt a bit underwhelmed.
I think at the same time, both of them are probably aware that STUC conference speech isn't going to make or break their their chances next year. It's not going to make or break the Hamilton kind of by-election. I don't think either of them are ever going to use a material, for it. But I think Hannah makes a great point about it being, it's especially worrying for Anas Sarwar. John Swinney goes there as a guy who says he's changed slightly, but has a reputation as a kind of centre right, not conservative with a small c. So I think
Centrist
yeah,
dad.
centrist dad, you know. So
God, I hate that phrase.
so I think he was always going to get a kind of lukewarm response, whereas someone like Anas Sarwar should be coming in and firing up the troops, firing up the comrades and whatnot, and he's kind of failed to do that. And I was trying to, it's went so under the radar. I was trying to read up on it today, and it was hard to find anything on it. You know, it was kind of hard to find.
You couldn't find it on the Daily Record
Well,
website.
well, obviously on the
We
Daily
gave it due
Record
prominence. Can I just say
broadcast.
that?
website,
Yeah.
but other elsewhere, it's kind of flown under the radar. Swinney got a bit more because he spoke about this far right summit and
Yep.
whatnot, and that's been in the news, and that's maybe something that's a bit crunchier for people to get their kind of teeth in. But for Anas Sarwar, and for him not to mention Sir Keir Starmer, the mood music appears to be that Keir Starmer's not going to come up to Hamilton.
Yeah, so there was a huddle after Anas Sarwar's speech. I said to him, will the Prime Minister be campaigning for Labour in the seat in the by-election? He said, I'm not expecting him to.
No.
So it's kind of linked to what you said, Hannah, about no reference to the PM in the speech. It's like he's the invisible Prime Minister.
Kind of. I'm not entirely sure what's happened with them two. I think they need to just bash their heads together. Because before the election, you couldn't move, or Anas Sarwar couldn't move without Keir Starmer being there or being mentioned. And it was very much like, the Labour government in the UK, this is a new era for Scottish Labour. This is opening the door for a new Labour First Minister in 2026, and it really did feel like there was some sort of tide of change. But then Keir Starmer came in and he decided to just make some really, really, really dodgy decisions that no one would have expected from a Labour government. We're not going to go over them again because anyone who listens to this will have heard it a million times. But I think that has really harmed Scottish Labour's sort of chances, but also the mood within the party. I think they've got the worst of both worlds because they're in opposition in Scotland and everyone's sick of them blaming the Scottish government and blaming the SNP. But then they're in government in Westminster and they're just constantly having to defend these mad decisions that they actually don't agree with, probably, but they can't really come out and say that.
I think the Starmer point of view, in terms of him coming up, it's a real lose-lose for Labour. If Starmer doesn't go, then he's a fear to. It shows splits in the party. It shows that UK Labour isn't popular up here. If he does come up, then the SNP are like, oh, look at this English politician coming up to try and dictate to Scots how they should vote, and Labour are desperate, they're having to bring in the big guns. I really don't know what the best course of action for them in that is, but either way, it's kind of rock hard place right now because Keir Starmer is unpopular. He's unpopular right across the UK. He's not just unpopular in Scotland, but he's unpopular everywhere, and I don't think he's going to be a vote winner to people on the fence. What he could do is he might get the core vote out. He might get in by-elections. It's that core vote that tend to turn up. But
I think
it's
just
a bit
the
of
optics of it looks
Yeah,
horrendous
yeah,
if he doesn't turn up. If I was advising him, I would say, do you know what,
I mean, what's
never
another his
mind
day?
what
A wee
but
helicopter
never
up to
mind what
Hamilton. And,
the SNP have to say about it. This is a huge, vote for your party. You should be there supporting them.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to be accused of hypocrisy because I'm always saying Anas Sarwar should put greater distance between Scottish Labour and UK Labour on issues where they disagree. So,
And then he does that and then he gets totally slated for it.
Yeah. I mean, my understanding is that he's still got a good relationship with the Prime Minister. They talk quite a lot. I think Anas Sarwar is probably more frustrated with the Treasury and Rachel Reeves than he is with the PM. And I think there's a sort of growing sense that Scottish Labour needs someone in the Treasury as their eyes and ears. They don't have that just now. I know that there's a PPS who's a Scottish MP, but I think maybe they need to bolster that presence in the Treasury. Because, let's face it, many of the decisions that have harmed Scottish Labour have come from the Treasury. They're cost-saving measures, regardless whether it's disability benefit cuts, winter fuel. It is coming from Rachel Reeves.
Well, all of the crazy decisions Labour have made are related to finance. I would say. Like all the high profile decisions that will cost them votes and subsequently will cost Scottish Labour votes are all Treasury policies.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So moving on, the second topic is Grangemouth. Coinciding with the STUC, it was confirmed by Petro Ineos that oil refining had ended at the plant after about 100 years. Now, it wasn't really news because we knew it was coming. It was confirmation of a decision that had already been made, but it created another massive political row with the Scottish Government blaming Labour for not nationalising the facility. Labour said that the SNP and the Tories had done nothing over the last 5 years. I guess if you're a worker at Grangemouth, you'll be looking at all the main political parties and feeling betrayed.
Well, yeah, and they're quite right too. You know, I feel like they are well and truly being used as a political football. I think that probably Labour actually has a good point on, you know, the fact that the Tories in Westminster, the SNP in Holyrood, you know, both parties been in power for a very long time and could have actually done something. They kind of just didn't do anything. And then, and you know, specifically the Tories kind of seem to have allowed a Chinese company to take over, you know, major infrastructure in Scotland. So then to turn around and blame Labour, actually, who only came in last year, it doesn't seem very fair that they are now left with carrying the can for it. But at the same time, you know, my real concern is the workers who overnight have just lost their jobs. There's talk, I was speaking to someone actually from the Scotland office before I came into the office today, and, you know, they were just talking about the focus is on, you know, skills development for those workers who are like currently out of work. There's no point in, you know, telling them in 5 years' time that there'll be a transition and there's a plan, because how are they meant to find work before then? So it's just terrible, the whole situation.
To be fair to Unite, they do seem to have negotiated pretty good terms for the workers who are moving on, pretty good packages. But I mean, I'm thinking of John Swinney's call for nationalisation. I know why he's saying it politically, but I mean, talk about 11th hour call. I mean, the SNP government have been silent on this issue for so long, and then right at the last second, they call for the plant
It's
to be...
ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. Like, fair enough if that's your idea, but where were you when you were finance minister, when you were, you know, in any position?
It's laughable.
Yeah.
It's also coincides, obviously, with, you know, the likes of British Steel, what's kind of happened down there, and the SNP have picked up on this as a chance to show that, you know, once again, Westminster is doing Scotland down, completely ignoring the fact that the two situations are completely different. I mean, that's the only steel-making plant left in the UK. There are other oil refineries, not to mention the optics of British Steel closing down as well. You can understand why Labour have kind of taken that decision, and that's ultimately, from a UK government point of view, that was, you know, that's the only two decisions they've got. They either nationalise it, you know, taxpayer money, or they let it close. Everyone seems to be kind of looking for this grey way, which doesn't really exist. As Hannah says, it's desperately sad for those workers who are in the middle getting. It doesn't really matter to them who moves in, as long as somebody does. You know, we talk about this just transition, and we kind of turn it into green jobs. That the timescales we're talking about, that's pie in the sky. If you were going to do that, that had to start 10 years ago.
But it's also,
and now you know, they're only talking about it now. It's
the Grangemouth issue. You know, the thing I struggle with is it doesn't make environmental sense. It doesn't make economic sense. Doesn't make political sense at all. So, yeah, if there was any you know, modicum of sense to be had of this situation, I could maybe try and explore that and understand it a bit more. But it's just, to me, you know, they're making it an import-only terminal. We're going to be causing more sort of carbon emissions by having to ship the oil there in the first place. none of it makes any sense. So it's nothing to do with actually green jobs and just transition.
I think there's also a reason why we haven't heard about nationalisation for years. And that's because it's a bad idea. I mean, is an industrial strategy really just going around nationalising failing or struggling plants and industries? I mean, we did it with Fergus Marine, did it with Prestwick Airport. I mean,
ScotRail.
How many of
But that could be because the SNP are not very good at it.
I think there's maybe an argument that if the private sector can't make these things work, can a division of the Scottish or UK government? I'm pretty sceptical. I mean, you mount these things up, how much public money do you plough into them? I just think it might be better to have a strategy of regeneration, giving the workers decent exit packages, making sure that they're retrained and reskilled, rather than constantly caving into populist calls for nationalisation.
It does also come against a backdrop of, and this is from the UK government and the Scottish government, this, oil and gas as a whole, as a whole sector isn't very popular within the SNP, although it's popular with parts of the SNP. It depends what part of the SNP you're talking to. The UK government's been a bit kind of wishy-washy on it. There's maybe a feeling there that if we are to move away from oil and gas, now I'm not saying that we should or we're going to, we should eventually, but it's not going to happen overnight. But there is, I can see Labour kind of looking at it and thinking, another oil refinery, there's plenty of, there's other oil refineries in the UK, why do we need another one attached to a sector that they've been quite hostile to? So it doesn't come as a surprise. Paul, I actually agree with you. Ultimately, nationalisation doesn't have a great record in this country, and I think there comes a point where you just need to say, look, it's failing, it needs to close. Whether it is failing or not, I think that's, if you believe Sir Jim Ratcliffe, then it's losing millions of pounds a day. He must be the only man in the oil industry who's losing millions of pounds a day. No one else seems to.
I was going to make that point.
I guess
the
that's
motivations for it closing is not may not necessarily be because it is losing a huge amount of money, given the foreign interests that are there within Grangemouth. And that's something that no one's really talking about.
In terms of the political ramifications, there's a story breaking on Sky News. The local MP, Brian Leishman, left-winger, big critic of the UK government on their stance on Grangemouth. He says that as a result of...
And Sunday Mail
columnist as well. Thanks for the plug.
Thank you.
He says that he fears Scottish Labour could come fourth at the Holyrood election as a result of the Grangemouth disaster. That's him saying that, not me. Fourth place? I mean...
No, not fourth. Fifth, maybe. No, I'm joking.
So that would be what, the SNP, the Tories reform then?
Yeah, potentially.
And certainly not because of this, I don't think.
No, and I think winter fuel payment benefit cuts are...
Waspy.
These are... I mean, I think it will damage Labour in that particular seat, but, I think will Labour come fourth? I don't think we're in that territory yet.
No, but I think he's kind of in a mentally in a kind of heightened state because basically the biggest issue in his constituency, he's been jumping up and down and shrieking about it for, months, and his party, who are in government, seem to have just abandoned him and the people in his constituency. So, while I think his analysis is maybe a bit wrong there, I can understand...
Off the leash?
Hey! I can understand why he's saying something like that. I do think that he's probably not planning for a parliamentary career after the next 5 years.
Well, here's the thing. Do you think he's going to be a Labour MP for much longer?
Well, yes.
I just wonder if the Labour Party will find a way to take the whip off him, or because they don't like dissent, they don't like rebels. I don't think he's standing up for his constituents.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite at that stage yet, is it?
No, because he's not.
You guys might know better than me.
No, he's a very vocal critic of the party when it comes to issues that he firmly believes in, and I to be honest, would be disgusted if he had the whip removed for speaking up for his own beliefs and for his constituents. I think there's too many, yes men and nodding dogs in all political parties, actually. But I think someone like Brian Leishman's a bit of a breath of fresh air.
I mean, if Fergus Ewan can hold on to the SNP whip, I'm sure Brian Leishman can hold on to the
Well, he
Labour.
didn't for a wee
for
bit.
a week.
Yeah.
I agree. I think you need people in a political grouping that are rebels, that can, on occasion, vote against their party, speak out. What I think is quite ironic is that the Labour selection procedures for the MPs, Jackie Bailey was in charge of it, and there was this real sense that she'd got loyalists into candidacies. I think Brian was just one that slipped
kind of
under the
snuck
radar.
in, yeah.
So she'll probably be kicking herself at that. But he stands up for his constituents.
Yeah.
He doesn't, as you say, he's not a...
And he isn't a
Yes,
Fergus Ewing character in that he doesn't object to absolutely everything that his party is doing. He objects or speaks out when he feels that he needs to. And, kind of coincidentally for him, the Grangemouth issue has been like a very prominent issue, and that's his constituency.
So the final issue we're going to talk about is assisted dying. There was a Holyrood committee that issued its report on this controversial subject this week, didn't take a position one way or the other, basically saying it's a conscience issue, and now it goes ahead to the stage 1 vote, which I think might be in a couple of weeks. It's certainly next month. I honestly don't know how this one's going to go. You speak to people who are in favour of the bill and its provisions, and they say that they're confident. You speak to critics, they're also confident. It's come before MSPs a couple of times before in the past and failed. There's a sense that this time it's going to be closer. Whether that means that Liam MacArthur, whose bill it is, he will get it over the line, I'm not sure. Dougie, I think the Express has a campaign for assisted dying to be legalised. How do you see it going?
One thing I'm going to say about this is I'm really glad it's not me who's having to make this call, because it is such a complex issue that goes way beyond maybe what we read in the papers and even what politicians will tell us. It obviously is going to be really tight. I think all parties will allow a conscience vote on it. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
So I don't even know if it'll be a right v left thing. It's so hard to kind of call it. It's just so complex and so emotive as well. It kind of reminds me, obviously, when we legalised same-sex marriage in Scotland, and that did go through quite kind of comfortably. But I remember speaking to an MSP at the time who said it was the single issue that got most messages into him from constituents, and they were almost all against it, same sex. Although he voted for it, he said, if I went with what my constituents were saying, I would have voted against it. But also when you're against something, you're more likely to kind of get in touch. And it feels like maybe something like that, maybe those against it are a bit more vocal, and there's a kind of silent majority that are probably like, in theory I might back it. Honestly, it's so tough to call. I really don't know how it's going to go. And there's similar legislation going through Westminster as well. And again, too close to call.
Well, see on that, the issue, the similar legislation down south, there was a vote in favour of assisted dying. I know there's been some issues with the legislation since then, but I just wonder if some MSPs might be fearful of it being legal in England but not in Scotland, and then you have cross-border difficulties. I don't know. I wonder if that will persuade a few of the doubters to vote for it when it comes for a vote next month. Yeah,
but then what if it doesn't proceed in Westminster, so then doesn't become law and then ends up becoming law in Scotland? So you're always going to have that. Someone has to go first.
Well, in part, you might get the case where if Westminster then reject it first, say there's a U-turn, that might have a similar effect in Scotland.
Yeah.
Folk might back away from it.
Yeah.
I think a factor might be the large number of MSPs who are standing down, because if you're going to be standing again and you're worried about maybe voting for it and the criticism of you and you might lose votes, you might just end up voting against it. But if you know that you're not going to be standing for election again, you're not going to be facing the wrath of voters, you might feel
Nothing to
emboldened.
lose.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
That could be an issue.
It would be quite disappointing, I think, if kind of any politics came into this. We see it a lot. We're talking about people's lives here. We actually are talking about people's lives here. We're talking about people being able to end their life. So it'd be really disappointing if people were kind of taking into account their next career
election,
move
prospects.
over somebody potentially actually dying. It's not this kind of obscure concept that it might have a knock-on effect. This policy might have a knock-on effect. Blah 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 down the line. This is literally a matter of life and death, and it's so tough.
Yeah, I can't remember which Tory MSP it was. I think it was last year. I think she said that she might have voted for it, but she's going to vote against it because she has no confidence that Holyrood will pass a good law. And I was quite disappointed she said that. That's quite a corrosive, cynical attitude. Just this idea that Holyrood can't do these things anymore. I mean, I know there's been a lot of legislation that's been struck down by the courts, but I do feel like it's a national parliament. This is the place that we should determine these things. And
Well, also, that is what you are, literally a lawmaker as an MSP. You are there to make sure the law is good, whichever law is produced. So you're effectively saying that you're crap at your job.
yeah, I'm a numpty. I can't be trusted to
Yeah.
legislate properly.
I mean, what a bizarre thing to say.
By the
And
same
also it's-
token, I think there might be people. Sorry, Hannah. I think there might be people who, in theory, in general, are supportive of it, but they recognise that perhaps what eventually goes to Holyrood, maybe the safeguards aren't there. So someone who might be actually supportive of assisted dying might vote against it because what needs. This law needs to be absolute watertight, iron-tight. So I can see why she might have said, I would need to wait and see, and if the law isn't, even though I'm supportive of assisted dying, if the law isn't, if I'm not satisfied that the legislation that goes in front of us,
Yeah, but that's why you've got
causes all
different
these- yeah,
stages,
exactly.
and then if you believe that at the final stage the law is not strong enough, then you don't. vote for it.
you don't just not
say
vote
at the
for
beginning.
it. It'd be a much better way to say I'll wait and see, but I'm only going to vote for it if I'm convinced that the bill we passed is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so look, it's going to be a dominant issue next month. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on Holyrood and this decision, and it's going to be one of the biggest decisions MSPs have faced since 1999. Okay, thanks very much to Hannah and to Dougie again. You can listen to this episode of Planet Holyrood on Spotify or Apple Music, or watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.